You've found your way to the Winning Tactics podcast with host Adam Sinkus. Adam discusses winning tactics with small business owners and entrepreneurs, uncovering processes and introducing the tools and solutions for enhancing the bottom line. Thanks again for finding your way to the Winning Tactics podcast, and now your host, Adam Sinkus.
All right, welcome back to the first official episode of 2021 for the Winning Tactics. So glad to have everybody aboard. Exciting times. I am one of those people that I thought 2020 was going to be, just one of those years that we were just going to toss it in the bin and keep moving. But man, I look back and amazing things happened. And I think that's the case for a lot of people that I've talked to. So I'm excited to see how 2021 grows from here. Before we get started, jump in. Just want to thank my affiliate partner, Cowork Hub Virtual. That is the virtual co-working space that is giving your coaches, consultants, and freelancers and solopreneurs a sense of place in a remote work world. For less than the cost of AirPods, take all your calls you can have in your virtual customizable office. Great tool, gives you video conferencing, audio conferencing, plus the sense of community because you can hang out with whoever else is in this space as well. Check it out, coworkhubvirtual.com. From there, just mention that you saw it on the Winning Tactics, and we'll make sure that they hook you up. Thank you so much for being our affiliate partner. And now to the important part of the show. We are going to dive down unexpected leadership because this is a space that so many small business owners get themselves into. And it's, oh my gosh, I'm growing my business. All of a sudden, I've hired a bunch of employees and now I have to lead them. And I don't know what to do. So I'm excited to introduce my guest today. Iggy Perillo, welcome to the show. So glad to have you on. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, Adam. It's great to be here with you all today. I'm Iggy Perillo. My business is WSL Leadership, and I work helping leaders and teams function together better. Right now, focused on creating masterminds for the new year and workshops, training, the whole suite of fun things like that. I have seen so many leaders struggle out there. And I'm excited to talk with you about unexpected leadership today. I've worked in the field of leadership and team development for over 20 years in lots of different types of venues, corporate world. I work with sports teams and athletes. I work with other people in youth and teens, collegiate people. So a whole mix all over the place. And there's this moment that I feel like a lot of leaders have where they suddenly are like, oh, wait, I'm in charge. Like, I'm the adult. Like, everyone's looking at me. Whoa. And I think you nailed one of those situations beautifully. You're starting a business. Things are cruising along. You're like, great. Okay. Now I'm going to expand a little bit. I'm going to have some more people working with me. But wait, they're working for me. But wait, they're working with me. I think, and a lot of folks, they're bringing in friends or connections or people they know well. And so there's sort of other relationship dynamics in there. But then, it gets, as things grow and grow or team members change over, suddenly people are looking to you to be the adult or looking to you to be the leader or looking to you to be in charge of things. And that's not always what people are prepared for. They're spending so much time studying, training, being entrepreneurs, being invested in their skills in their product or their process, the thing that they're creating and doing. So that's not always where they have spent time training to lead. And then it's a surprise. It sounds like you've met folks in this boat before, Adam.
That was me. I've been in that
was
boat.
You. Okay, great. Fantastic.
That was me, been in that boat. I remember my very first leadership position. I fought going to be a leader in a call center type atmosphere for a long time. I said, screw it. I got to do this. It's got to check that box off the resume. And, that first month, regardless of the many hours that I spent in leadership development classes and trainings and things like that, that first month, I learned a lot about myself.
Good. And look, and you came out of it alive. Good job. A success. But
you're right. It's interesting when we go from, a lot of times you're going from that friend space to now I have to give them directions and hold them accountable and all those things that make leaders successful. And it's like, it's a totally different mindset at that point. And there's good leaders and bad leaders.
Oh, yeah. And I think you mentioned one of the things that makes the people the most uncomfortable is holding other people accountable. People flee from this. Like, they run away. They would do anything. They would avoid it if at all costs. And I was recently re-listening to the Gifts of Imperfection, this great book by Brene Brown. And she talks about how holding people accountable is so much more work than just shaming them or blaming them, or, just like, you can just make fun of them or just kind of write them off or ignore them. But holding people accountable is so much work. And there are complicated relationships there. If it's a friend or someone like you feel like that can add a level of awkwardness. But I think broadly people hate holding other people accountable. And on the other side, like you mentioned, also doing a lot of leadership training and development. I feel like sometimes, I don't know if this was true for you, like you're given like a checklist, like here's the things you do, or like here's the system and you follow this system, or here's a process, you follow this process. But leadership is a lot messier that I've found than a system or a checklist or a process. And so people then are like, I'm ready, maybe I got my checklist. And then someone asks them, something, and they're like, I don't have any idea. Like it goes off the rails fast, I've seen.
Yeah, for me, the hardest part of leadership, the hardest part of getting into leadership was having those difficult conversations where you had to identify a behavior that was not ideal and hold them accountable to correcting that behavior and make sure that they got the message without creating, any more issues or tension with it. What are some of your favorite tips and tricks to get through kind of that process? Because I think that's a big hanging point for a lot of new leaders and people that don't have a lot of leadership experience.
Oh yeah, the hard conversation you need to have, and you need to have it, right? Like it's weighing on you. Someone's showing up late every day, but you're like, ugh. Like who can talk to them about that? You're like, oh, it's me. I need to talk to them about that. Showing up late every day, like whatever it is. I think there's something to be said, like you actually mentioned this, like separating the person from their behavior, right? Like the behavior is not okay. The person might be lovely and charming and great and your best buddy, but their behavior is the problem. So thing one, although this is not going to be a checklist, like I would make sure you're really clear on what the behavior is. Like, is it showing up late? Is it, whatever it is, like for that example, be really clear on the behavior because that's what you want to have change. The person, you're not going to actually change their attitude, or you're not going to change their motivation, and you're not going to change who they are as a person, but you might be able to influence them to make better choices about their behavior. So be clear on what you're actually doing. It's behavior. And be clear about the behavior you want to see. Like, you're showing up late, I want you to show up on time. Like, that's obviously a very simple one, and they get much more convoluted and complex, but we'll start simple. Like, we'll go a bunch deeper. So if you are clear about those things, I think those take some of the pressure off of the conversation. You're like, oh, I don't have to come down on this person and tell them they're a bad person. I just need to tell them behavior needs to change. And I think people are sensitive too. If you're going to tell me I'm a bad person, I'm going to be like, either cry my eyes out or run away or punch you in the face. Like, there's sort of only a few options apparently for me or most people when someone tells them they're a bad person, right? They get defensive or kind of, it doesn't feel like that's a great productive conversation. And so I think being clear about behavior, separating those from the people. I like to personally just ask a lot of questions and be very curious at first. Like, if a person's coming in late every day, why are they coming in late? Do you know? Do you know who they are? What's going on with them? Why this is important to them? Is it we assume there's a lot of assumptions, right? Like, oh, I assume they're just lazy. I assume they're just sleeping in. I assume they're just, whatever. Cool, those are all assumptions. Check all of those. But you check those in reality by being curious. And it might not be, I would rather open up a conversation than show up and be like, show up on time. That's not, there's this sort of idea of leadership being this drill sergeant yelly person. Like, that's also not great leadership to just show up and yell at people, just show, and be yelly.
Yeah, no, I love that. I've always differentiated the boss to the leader, right? Two different, they're two very different people, right? Bosses shouts orders from behind their desk. The leader jumps in the trenches and finds out how they can help you be successful. And I've always kept it that simple because it's really easy to quantify that and look back at your leadership role models, good and bad, and go, that was a boss, that was a leader.
That's a great differentiation. I think that's a great distinction. And I think people know what you mean. But I think we assume we have to be the boss somehow. Like this is sort of this concept of what leadership is it looks like the boss, which is not actually useful or effective often.
Yeah, I found when I became the most effective in leadership, it was when I started understanding that my team probably knew more than I did. And being okay with that.
They're the specialists in what they're doing, probably. Yeah. I think a lot of places, though, people get pushed into leadership roles due to tenure. Like you've been around for 5 years, 3 years. Okay, you're the manager now. You're the division, whatever, the team person. And unfortunately, not all great team members make great team bosses or team coach. I mean, that's like the classic, not all great players make great coaches, in the sports world. Like it's similar, I think. I think it's the same anywhere. Just because you're a specialist in your field and are good at it doesn't mean you automatically have this ability to lead and connect and work with people and to help them get better. I like that you said that, like that your role is actually helping all of them do their jobs better. Everyone, whatever your major outcome is, like that's like the real purpose of leadership is elevating other people.
Yeah, I want to step back because you mentioned asking more questions. You like to ask a lot of questions, and I love that philosophy. It's the world I live in. When you're starting to have conversations with your team, what are some of those good questions you can ask in like a coaching conversation to really draw out, their thoughts on the situation that's laid out?
Sure. I mean, the most simple is like open-ended questions, right? Versus yes or no questions is the simple, but then there's more, the subtlety in there. Asking why questions is not super helpful. But asking how or what questions, it can be a little more helpful. Because fundamentally, why is, because I felt like it. I don't know. Like we don't answer why super well, even though like every 4-year-old will ask 7,000 why questions, right? But it's hard for us to understand why. We're not actually great at understanding how we function internally. We think we know. We're like, oh yeah, I know myself, no problem. But then you ask someone why they do something, they're like, I have no idea. It just seemed like it was cool. Like we're not good at why. So skip why. But I like the very broad, like, tell me about this, which is just sort of opening a conversation. Like, tell me about, your mornings. Tell me about getting into work every day. Tell me about, from that example you were talking about before, tell me about something or other. So I'm asking for them to like start talking, give the information. And I think it'll quickly get to a point of like, oh, we're actually talking about, I'm not just chatting about like what coffee you like to drink. I want to know, tell me about like, your thoughts on timeliness, like that could be kind of pointed, like, oh wait, okay, I'm feeling like needled there a little bit, but tell me about like how you engage with this work. It can be super broad, I guess. Like it depends a little bit on what feels natural to you, right? Like as a person, like not everyone's going to be able to be like, tell me about, it can sound like tell me about your childhood, which is this very like psychiatrist classic kind of style, which is not where we're going, people. We're more about like, tell me about what's happening with you. Tell me about what's going on. Tell me about how you're feeling. Tell me about what's going on with you, a little bit. Like I like to start pretty broad.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think starting broad and working in, I love the process of self-discovery. So that's something that I always push people is if you can make them discover why we're having the conversation and what solution you need to be an outcome, all of a sudden, like, the light bulb comes on, they get it, and your life becomes infinitely easier.
Oh yeah. 5 minutes later in that conversation, like, so how do you think other people feel when they see you rolling in here 10 minutes late? Like all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, like they feel like, giving that other, like once people realize perspective on themselves, I think that's super powerful. Those moments of like realization sometimes.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit. Because I think conversations in moments of coaching or discipline, things like that is one piece of it. But I always found that you have to build a connection with your team, right? And that happens typically not in those coaching conversations.
I hope not, but maybe. Yeah,
well, maybe. But how do you go about, or how do you help leaders go about building better connections with their team?
It's a funny question that you ask, because I've worked with teams and they might be sensing they have like a conflict or a problem, or, they have an issue they want to work with for whatever that is. And I'll roll in and like spend a ton of time talking about who they are, like why they're there, whatever. And they're like, okay, let's get to the issue. I'm like, well, no, the who you are and why you're here matters just as much as what your issue is, the thing that you want to work with. And so sometimes leaders are like, okay, can we just cut through this like chit chat stuff and get to the issue? I'm like, well, the chit chat stuff, that's connecting and building who we are. So I would say putting some intention into building connection and learning like who the people are that you're working with. And I think there's sort of different degrees of philosophies that people bring to like, well, in my workspace is my work front, and I have my family, my friends, like whatever. Those are very separate. There's like the separate world kind of people, which is fair. Like not everyone needs to be like, oh, let me tell you about your grandma and whatever. Like some people are though. And you're like, okay, I know everything about you after 5 minutes. And I don't think that's like, all those are fine. But if you know who your people are, I'd say the important parts are like how they like to be addressed, like what their name is. I have another buddy, my friend Jen Stanfield, does these programs where she has kids in schools introduce themselves to their classmates. And she says every time there's a classmate that turns around and is like, oh, I didn't realize you pronounced your name that way. Or like, oh, I didn't realize, like, oh, we called you Jen, but you go by Jennifer. Oh, we had no idea, so who they are, like the basics of who they are, like an intro is great. But also I know I said don't ask why, but like what brings them there, the why that drives them to be doing that work. And that's where there's levels of comfort, right? Where people are like, I'm here to cash a paycheck, and someone else is like, I'm here because this mission moves me and like I'm engaging with it like on a spiritual level. And you're like, great, cool. You do that, you're cashing a paycheck, now we're on the same page. Like it can be all over the place. But I think those, without making intention for that, I think people do this in ways that they think are drawing people in, like the classic, like, oh, we're gonna have a happy hour, everyone's gonna show up except for the parents and the people who don't drink and the kids who, like, the person who has to like run to their club practice, whatever. So suddenly your happy hour is a really exclusive little set of people, and that's where you're supposed to be doing this bonding and connecting. So I would put some intentional effort into building connection and whatever is going to work for you. And there's sort of this kind of, I avoid using the word team building, because that is the connotation of, well, we're all going to go skydive, let's go team building. And you're like, that is what one person thinks is interesting and everyone else is peeing their pants about. And like, what team comes of that? So I think the idea of team building is team development. I would say building these senses of connection they can happen in tons of different ways. I'm not ruling out skydiving. I'm just saying it needs to be done well with intention to bring people together versus freak people out and push people apart.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I used to do is when I was over a frontline team is I used to take time. I actually put it in my calendar every day to go literally walk around and talk, have just a 2-minute touch point with every single person on my team every single day, to build that sense of connection, and I had a team of like 25 people. So, and I don't always have the best of memory. So I literally had a spreadsheet on my computer, and I'd read through the spreadsheet and see what was going on. And then I'd come back after I had all my conversations and make notes and updates, so that when I went back and had the conversation the next day, I could be informed. And, and it was a really cool, when I started doing that, it took about 3 weeks to see this like total transformation of how the team worked around me.
Oh yeah. That sounds like an amazing process for you to be able to like literally just go connect with them one-on-one and one-on-one and one-on-one. Like, and I think the next level is to get them to have that same connection intermingling across, the different people. And it depends on obviously your industry, what you're doing, if that is like how much effort needs to go in that. When I work with athletes on teams, I'm like, this is the thing, is that you all mesh together super well, right? So that's where I put a lot of effort and energy. And I think even if there are, like, I think you mentioned working in call centers before, it can be very isolating and very independent, but I think that sense of connection and that sense of camaraderie is still a part of it. I think you can still any kind of work you're in, turn to your buddy and be like, can you believe it just happened? Blah, blah, blah. Like whatever it is. Like, there's a lot of reasons to feel that sense of connection and support from people.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? And let's talk a little bit because you mentioned intentionality and you mentioned isolation, right? And those are two things that are pretty big on everybody's plate after 2020 here, especially in leadership, because it has become even harder to really build those connections in our newfound digital world. How have you been helping people connect and build that sense of connection in a remote space?
I've moved a lot of my operation, all of them, to be honest, like online. And so it's been an interesting mix. I've had meetings with one-on-one meeting is kind of not much has changed with that, but like with a group meeting, it's just sort of, you have different tools a little bit. I think I was always engaging as a pretty experiential facilitator. And so how are we going to engage? How are we going to like interact, do things? And without the physical space to move in, there's just different tools you end up using. I play a lot of games, to be honest, and like do things that are more fun and like try to get people to enjoy what they're doing. Shockingly, like you can enjoy a meeting online, people. It is possible. I'm proof. And so I've done things that are like really focused on fun engagement, but also having more space and time for those serious conversations. And I think, and some of that just depends on how you're managing your virtual space. Like, am I going to meet with a small group? Am I going to meet with a big group? Am I going to divide them up? Like just like kind of the logistics of that help steer whether people are going to be willing to engage or feel like they need to be more guarded. Or, that same work to build connections just needs to keep happening in a virtual space. And maybe that means more one-on-one or small group meetings. But once people feel that sense of psychological safety, then they're able to talk and engage a little more personally online. When online, it can seem very cold and distant, I think.
Yeah. Considering probably, I look at probably 90% of my communication is via text of some sort, whether it be an email, whether it be, instant, whether it be, text messages. And I think that is incredibly impersonal. It's hard to always understand the tone of voice that's behind it.
Oh, yeah. Right. That sarcastic emoji. Where is it? I need it. Yeah.
And you can only use so many exclamation points where people look at you like you're a crazy person.
Yeah. Over enthusiastic. You're like, or just hyped. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, I think it's really interesting. One of the things that I've focused on is working to just take the first 5 minutes or so of every touch point and keep it not business related, just personal. Hey, how's your day going? How's the family? Especially now, how's the holidays? Things like that. Keeps it feeling more personal, feeling like a sense of place.
Yeah. Feeling that sense of like I'm talking to a person, not just a screen, like I feel like we feel like we're just talking to robots sometimes through the screen, through the camera, all the things. But yeah, it's worth being a person. It's worth having a personality too. I think this has changed over time. Sort of earlier on in the last spring and summer, people were sort of very professional look and, like kind of like serious. But I think people have, because they've just gotten worn down by spending so much time online that they're like, oh, I'm a person. Like, oh, wait, hold on. I need to grab that thing. Like people have, I think, physically loosened up a little bit. It's been my impression anyways over time, which is great. Like, yeah, you're a person. It's okay. Be a person. Yeah.
No, absolutely love that. Let's take one more shift here before we start to wrap up, because I want to talk about the ever so important, performance appraisal piece of leadership, because I think this is, again, just going back on my own experiences and experiences from training leaders in call center space, is a space where there's a lot of misses, a lot of ambiguity. I can't even say the word.
Ambiguity? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there we go. Right. I still got Christmas brain going on a little bit. So, right. But ambiguity in how we appraise the performance of people on our team. And obviously every business is a little bit different in how we do that. But I know there are some core things that that need to happen as a leader to be successful in that space. What are your thoughts on that?
Are you asking like how to appraise a leader, or how a leader should like do assessments of other people, or kind of both?
Kind of both. Let's talk about both sides of that.
Great. Everything. We're going to throw it all in there. Perfect. Oh, I think it's a great question. And I don't have like a snappy one word answer for it, because it is a little bit individual and personal and different from place to place. But I think there is a baseline of like effectiveness, right? Like, is this person doing their job effectively? And I think we want to measure all of these metrics very quantitatively. Like, oh, well, did you produce enough calls, widgets, whatever it is? Did you do enough? Like are your numbers good? Whatever your numbers are. But I think the qualitative side of leadership is equally, if not more important, right? Like, so I produced 1 million things, but then everyone quit because they hate me. Like, cool. Now next month, we have to retrain a whole new team because everyone left, because it was terrible. So like the idea, like some of those more qualitative metrics, I think matter a ton. I don't believe in like annual or quarterly reviews. I don't think those are super effective. Only that people blow them off and put no weight in them, and then they're like, cool, okay, are we done with this conversation? I'm going to go back to doing exactly what I was doing before. Like, I just don't find them super effective as a training tool. If you're trying to train someone to do something better, and I just told you it once a year, what kind of training is that? Like, that's like the worst training ever, right? Like, that makes no sense. Or I told you 4 times a year I'm going to tell you how to do something, and then you're on your own. Good luck, So I think it needs to be much more interactive and ongoing. Are there actual goals? Are there actual milestones? Are there actual things you need to be working toward? Great. Let's make those really specific. I think overall, like whether you're either side you're looking at, making sure that communication is so clear, right? I think I've seen like the reviews that are very vague. There's whole books of like language for performance reviews. Like, there's literally books of this, right? And they're like, well, you met expectations. I'm like, oh, okay, thanks. Like, gold star for everyone. Like, what does that mean? Like, I think which is just like, can be very vague or feel like, should I do more of that? Should I do less of that? And so knowing what are your metrics we're looking at that matter? What are the things that, the qualitative things that, like, how are we getting information on those? How do we assess qualitative, like, not that likability is one, but like effectiveness in terms of, am I actually looking at retention of staff down the line? Is that one of my metrics as a leader versus just how many things I do? You're being super clear. Like, if you want to see behavior change, we'd mentioned those hard conversations about behavior change early. Like, maybe you need to have these hard conversations and be really clear about what the behavior is. Like, you need to show up on time every day. Great. That's super clear. Or I need to see this, that, whatever it is. So if you're not clear, don't waste your time being unclear. I think those are the main things.
Yeah. I agree with you on the annual, quarterly thing. I think it's the biggest sham whatsoever. Leaders push them off until the last possible minute because they got 1,000 other things going on. Employees just shrug at them because they know that it's just been done on a whim. And so I am all for you on, I think it's good to have regular checkpoints, but weekly, bi-weekly is what I've always shot for. And that seemed to be effective. And not every one of those has to be this like really formalized, structured conversation. Matter of fact, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree with this or not, in my opinion, if every one of those is a formalized, structured conversation, it's a bigger detractor than it is an improvement process at that point.
I don't know that if you're like, when you say this as a process, I just have this visions of like sheets with like bubbles I'm checking in, like a report card, right? Like, if I'm just going to fill out a report card on you every other week, like, who cares? Like, that seems like that is like not effective either. But if we're going to talk about what matters to you and what matters to me and how we can get on the same page every week, great. Do it every week.
I love it. I absolutely love it. We are getting towards the end of time here. So I always like to wrap up the show with some final thoughts, something that our audience can take away and apply from our conversation today. So I leave the floor to you for your final thoughts.
Well, I guess I have two things come to mind. One is that if you're struggling as a leader, you're not alone, and you don't have to go it alone. And I think a lot of leaders like, I hope they're listening to your podcast. I hope they're finding books, they're finding masterminds, they're finding connections. Like, thinking you have to recreate the wheel by yourself doesn't make you a leader. Like that, don't do it, people. Like, use the tools, use the skills, use other people's wisdom around you, for sure, is one thing. And I think the other thing just goes back to that conversation we had at the beginning. Like, have those hard conversations. Like, suck it up, whatever it takes for you to do it and feel prepared. It's worth doing. Things will be so much better in the long run.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time. Definitely some great nuggets of wisdom that small business owners, new leaders can take away and really start to build their own leadership style. So where can people find you if they want to find out more information about your master classes or all the other great stuff you got going on?
Absolutely. I'm at WSLleadership.com. And yeah, workshops are there, masterminds are there, all the things happening in my world. Everything. It's all there. That's the easiest. And I'm on the social medias out there too. You can find me there.
Awesome. We'll make sure that those links are in the show notes as well, so you can go ahead and click on those and check out more. We really appreciate your time. Everybody, have a wonderful week. We will be back next Tuesday, same time, same place. Have a great afternoon.
Well, that wraps up yet another episode of the Winning Tactics Podcast. You can find Adam on both the LinkedIn and Facebook platforms. And to support the show and ensure the success of the podcast, would you kindly consider visiting Patreon.com/Adam Sinkus? We greatly appreciate it. And until next time, from the Winning Tactics Podcast, remember, culture is how your team behaves when no one is looking. Take good care, and thanks for listening.